Let's bring in Hollywood divorce attorney David Glass for more on this. David.
People going through divorce are going through some of the hardest times of their lives, and a lot of what they're going through is emotional. And in any divorce, there's a huge sense of loss, and loss of relationship, of money, some friends.
Hi, I'm David Glass, host of the Hourglass podcast. If you watched our last episode, when we talked to Victor, a dad of 3 who's been fighting his parental alienation case since 2000, you will really appreciate today's guest, Dr. Richard Warshak, one of the world's most knowledgeable experts on the subject of parental alienation. Based on his book, Divorce Poison, he's here to explain that topic from a psychological point of view, like how a child becomes alienated from one parent, the process of undoing that damage, how the courts view this troubling syndrome, and what you can or cannot do about it if you're the victim. Dr. Warshak is a graduate of Cornell University. He's been a White House consultant, past clinical professor of psychiatry at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. He's an author, and he's one of the world's most respected authorities on divorce, child custody, and the psychology of alienated children. His groundbreaking studies appear in 18 books and more than 90 articles in 18 languages. His work has even been endorsed by 110 researchers and practitioners and published by the American Psychological Association. His work has even influenced decisions at the Supreme Court level. Now, Dr. Warshak's book, Divorce Poison: How to Protect Your Family from Bad-Mouthing and Brainwashing, is widely regarded as a classic. And his video, Welcome Back Pluto: Understanding, Preventing, and Overcoming Parental Alienation, is used in every state in the U.S. and 31 foreign countries. Hi, Dr. Warshak. I'm David Glass.
Hi, David. I'm Richard. Nice to meet you.
Thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Sure. It's my pleasure. I'm honored.
So we're eager for you to shed some light on the overall parental alienation area. Now, you and I understand what parental alienation is. Me from being a divorce lawyer for 30 years, you from being a psychiatrist and actively studying it. But can we start off with an everyday practical definition of it for our viewers?
Let's see. Probably the best way to put it is that it's a disturbance in which children reject a parent for no apparent good reason. Rejection can range from being sort of very mild to severe, so that maybe the child shares a list of complaints that one parent has about the other parent. But then when the child's with the parent who's the target of those complaints, the child warms up so that the alienation doesn't get entrenched. But in more severe alienation, it can get to the point where the child just refuses contact and sometimes expresses just raw hatred of a parent. And this is a parent who formerly was very loved and the child had a good relationship with, and the child comes to believe that the parent is worthless. Almost always, if the child rejects a parent without a good reason, then almost always it occurs when the child's sharing negative attitudes that the preferred parent, the parent the child prefers, has about the other parent. And so the child sort of joins in with that.
And are there any estimates or any census type numbers on how many divorced couples and their kids are affected by parental alienation?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends on how you measure it. But in one survey, a nationally representative survey, about 1 in 4 parents who were divorced or separated reported that their child was moderately to severely alienated from them, which that would generalize to about 4 million children in the U.S. So we're talking about, quite a large population. I'd say conservatively, maybe 2 to 4% of children whose parents divorce become alienated to some degree. And so that we're talking about maybe 30,000 children a year being added to the rolls of those who were alienated. And it's not just their parents they're rejecting, but oftentimes their grandparents and other relatives. So there's a lot of suffering going on, both from the point of view of the child who's losing the relationship, and then from the point of view of the adults who don't understand why is this beloved child acting this way. Right.
And then what are some of the first signs that you might see in your former partner, your ex, that they're intending to try and turn the children against you?
The specifics vary, but the cases generally follow the same pattern, and they begin with let's take the example of a father who's going to turn the son against the mother. So he begins by developing these themes about what's wrong with the mother, and so he selects them. Sometimes the theme is tied to her lifestyle. He may criticize her for spending excessively, or telling that, or he'll tell the kids, you can't have what you want because mom's spending too much money.
Right.
Or the theme might be that she cares more about her job than about taking care of you, or that she's a lousy cook. I mean, the themes can be just about anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in general, the father's ridiculing the mother and in front of the children, and then he encourages them to side with him to put her down. If she's got a higher standard of living, the father can use that to create sympathy for how unfair it is that he doesn't have as nice a home or a nicer car. If she's got a
Right.
lower standard of living, the father will emphasize the benefits if the kids stay with him in full time in his home. If the mother happens to have a new boyfriend or a new husband, then the children are encouraged to feel jealousy about that, and that's exploited. That she may care more about her stepchildren than she does about you.
Right.
It gives the idea that the kids have been replaced. So in the end, all this results in is that the children come to think that their mother's not worthy of their love, or that she doesn't really love them, or doesn't love them enough, or in some cases that she's dangerous to be around. So the overall message is mom doesn't deserve your trust. She doesn't deserve your affection or respect. And when that theme gets established, then the father and child develop this sort of bond about their common complaints about the mother. And the father will try to get the kids to feel sympathy for him by playing the victim role. I miss you when you're not here.
Yeah.
You'll have a much better time if you stay with me. And then what happens is we begin to see the children now showing compliance with the themes, and they begin to reject their mother. They might act withdrawn. They start complaining to their father, and the dad will actually test the children's compliance with this whole program by asking them about how things went during the visit, making it clear that he wants a bad report, and he wants to hear that they didn't have a good time with mom or that she screwed up in some way. And then the father will actually encourage the children to show loyalty by expressing outwardly a preference to stay with him and to avoid, being with her. And of course, the dad will say, "That's just what the kids are saying." It's he'll act
Right.
as though he's innocent of any of the manipulations. And
Yeah.
around this time, mom becomes very concerned, and she wants to get a professional in to help. And the father will undermine the kid's investment in the treatment. Your mom thinks you're crazy. That's why she's taking you to a therapist. And he may not outright say you don't need to see a therapist, but even if the court's ordered it, he may try to undermine the child's cooperation with the treatment. And whereas, a dad who really is concerned about his kids will encourage them to work on the relationship. He'll want them to get help. So
Yeah.
once the kids learn that dad doesn't think much of therapy, they begin to oppose it. So not only are they not getting the help they need to improve their relationship, but it adds to their negative feelings about their mom because now she's the villain who's making them go to treatment.
Right.
And that's at that point, mom may consult you and
Right.
and feel like she's got to get the court to intervene. And
Yeah.
and then of course that's even used against her, and the dad will try to reframe this as, well, the kids just like me better than you. And that's not what's going on in these cases.
Right.
And at some point in the very end stages of alienation, the degree of rejection gets much worse. Sometimes the kids will get violent with the parent. They'll destroy property. And it also starts spreading to other relatives. Anyone associated with the rejected parent is now rejected themselves. And I have to stress that although there's this path, it can occur very quickly. It can be spread out over months, or it can happen really literally overnight. I've seen cases happen where a child goes to spend time with a parent, and the next morning they're calling and saying, "I'm not coming back home."
Right.
So,
And the And then the parent, the alienated parent, the victim parent, the parent who's left behind in all of this. When I've seen them, when we come to court, they have to spend most of their energy and time at the start disproving all these allegations against them. I don't use drugs. I have 10 weeks of clean drug treatment. I don't go to prostitutes. I don't drink excessively. And so they're sort of climbing out of a hole to even get to a level playing field in the courtroom.
It's very hard to demonstrate that the parent that the children are aligned with is actually pulling the strings and getting the children to act like puppets. It's hard to catch them in the act. It's very helpful if you can and if you have evidence of what they're saying. But oftentimes that's behind the scenes. And so we've got children who are rejecting a parent, but the rejected parent says, you've manipulated them, you've taught them to hate me. And the other parent says, no, you've mistreated them and you're harsh with them, or, they have good reasons for rejecting you. You can't manipulate a child to hate a parent, is basically what the theory they present in court.
Right.
But we know you can. Parents influence children in many ways, and that's one of the ways they can do that, particularly with the heightened emotions of a separation.
Mm-hmm. Like a case that I had, it's got to be 25 years ago, when parental alienation was still like a relatively new thing in psychology. We had a child who was then 6 saying that dad used to do X, Y, and Z to me while I was sleeping in my crib. And that was sort of our touch point for how would a 2-year-old remember something that their dad did to them when they were in the crib. And most kids don't remember much before 3. And that was sort of our touch point. Is there any testing of what the kids report? And is it their words versus an adult's words?
Sometimes it is their words versus an adult's words, but in other cases, you look for those kinds of discrepancies between what's really possible versus what the child's saying. And sometimes the allegations are very severe like that. Other times, they're very trivial. Like a child will, when asked, why don't you want to see your dad? They'll say things like, he makes me go to bed on time. Things like that. He doesn't play enough with us, or he's on his phone during the soccer games and that kind of thing. Just things that while they may be legitimate complaints that kids have, never add up to losing a parent. And then in other cases, they're more severe allegations, and they have to be very carefully investigated. And you've got to keep an open mind. A good evaluator doesn't go in with a preconceived notion about whether the allegations are accurate or not, and they just look to explore what is the child saying, how realistic is it, what other evidence is there that supports this. Are there other children in the home who don't make those allegations? Sometimes a parent is accused of just being a terrible parent and not having empathy, not being capable of a good relationship. But meantime, they have a wonderful relationship with their stepchildren, and so or with children from a prior marriage. So all those facts have to be looked at, and it can be very complicated, and it can be very difficult for the court, because by the time these cases get to court, the rejected parent has probably made a series of mistakes, maybe overreacted to the children's harsh treatment, and then it becomes difficult to disentangle whether the behavior, losing your temper was the cause of the children not wanting to be with you, or was your reaction when you just didn't understand, why are my kids refusing to spend time with me? Kids will say to their mother, you're not a real mother. I wish you would die. I mean, it can get quite serious.
Right. In a couple of my cases, the parent who is trying to take the kids away actually physically will kidnap the kids or move them far away or set up visitation sessions and never show up. And then later say, look, the other parent wasn't even interested in seeing you. You haven't seen the other parent for 6 months, even though they were doing everything possible to prevent it.
Right. And that whole time the children are with a parent who has this very negative view of the other parent. So they begin to see the other parent through the eyes of the parent they're with and who they're dependent on. So in a way, they feel like they've got to align and show that they're being loyal to that parent because the other parent's not around. And other times the other parent will show other signs of love and interest in the children, like sending checks for special schools and things like that. And I've had cases where years later, the child will reconcile maybe with the parent, but say, but I could never get over why you wouldn't pay for my college. And
Right.
dad whips out the checkbook and shows all the receipt, all the canceled checks for having supported it. And these things were just hidden. So any sign of the parents' love, gifts that are sent are hidden from the children. And then that supports the idea that, your other parent doesn't really care about you. And it's kind of tough for kids in that situation because the evidence of the other parent's love is being withheld from them.
Yeah. Now you mentioned, a child turning 18 or going off to college and then starting to second guess. Was all that really happening? Is that a common experience where kids get away from home, start to develop into their own people, their own adult shape, and then they start having doubts?
Well, it does happen. We don't know how often it happens, so we don't know how common it is, but it does seem to help when the child gets out of the orbit of the parent who had been doing the alienating. And at some point, something happens. Maybe a friend asks them about this. How come you never talk to your dad? Or how come you never call your mom? Or how come we don't see her? Then they begin to question. Sometimes it's a close relationship they get in who encourages them to start rethinking this. Sometimes they just sort of do it on their own, or they discover some documents that show that the reality that had been presented to them was not accurate. But then there are other cases which are very tragic where the children never reconcile. They never rethink what's happened. Or if they do, it's very, very late in life and they've missed out on so many years of a relationship.
For the child, the now grown child who comes back and reestablishes contact, what's going through their mind? I mean, that's got to be crushing to have believed something for the better part of your childhood and early adulthood and then have all that reversed.
Yeah, they keep thinking of the things they missed out on, that the parent wasn't there for graduation ceremonies, wasn't there maybe at a wedding, wasn't there at the birth of a grandchild. And so they feel sad about that, like a sense of loss. But sometimes they also feel very angry when they realize what the other parent had done to them. They're angry that the parent had used them in that way just for their own vindictive aims. And sometimes they're angry at the parent they had rejected because they blame that parent for not having worked harder to overcome the problem. And that parent will say, well, we were going to court, but you told me that if I continued the case, you'd never talk to me again. And so I dropped the case because you begged me to. And they'll say, well, you shouldn't have done that. You should have hung in there and fought for me. And essentially the parent's in a position where no matter what they do, it's going to be considered wrong. But it is tragic. And in a lot of cases, the children don't end up rejecting the parent that they realize had misused them in that way. They may have a more of a distant relationship and they have an undercurrent of resentment. But at the same time, the older they get, the more they're willing to just place boundaries on the relationships, but still maintain some contact.
Looking at it from the
tragic thing is that oftentimes the grandparents have died already, and before the child is old enough to reconcile.
Yeah. Now, looking at it from the point of view of the parent who's been alienated, who's been left out or taken out of the picture, while this is going on and their kids are apparently rejecting them, what are the things that they should do? And also, what are the things that they shouldn't do? You mentioned earlier, getting angry or making bursting out in anger when you really didn't want to say that. But what are the things they should do?
Well, if we're still talking about in the earlier years when the child's under the age of 18, they should at all costs try to maintain contact unless there's going to be a question of their safety or the safety of the child. So if your child is really out of control, you may not be able to do that. Otherwise, you should make every effort to maintain contact. Try to be patient. Try to have a thick skin because you're going to hear criticisms that's so disrespectful that in a normal course of events, you would chastise the child, punish them for that. But in this case, there's another authority figure who's supporting them saying those things. So you don't have that power anymore. anymore. But merely by having the contact, it makes it harder for the children to see you exclusively through the eyes of the other parent. So you want to do that. You usually will need to get a lawyer involved. You want to get the court involved to support the children so that the decision is not on the children's shoulders whether or not they spend time with you. Basically, the court says it will happen, and your other parent's going to get in trouble if they don't facilitate it. That's important to do. If you're in a situation where you really can't get the help you want, I mean, ideally, you get the other parent to some kind of parent education program with you. You start learning how hurtful it is to children to use them in this way. Maybe you get into treatment with a psychotherapist or a family therapist. So oftentimes you need the court to support that, though, because as I said before, the parent who wants the child alienated is going to undermine the child's confidence in the treatment, and so you need to get the court involved. And then there are some highly specialized programs for the very severely alienated children in a situation where the court feels like this child is in jeopardy remaining in that home, is being emotionally abused and needs to be protected, but the child is so angry or rejecting of the other parent that the other parent has to find some kind of program to help the child adjust rapidly to being placed back in the custody of that parent. And that's where these specialized programs like Family Bridges I've written about that have learned how to help children in a rapid way sort of open their eyes to what's been going on and help rescue them really from this sort of blind alley they've gotten themselves into. And then there are some situations where nothing can be done. A special program is not available. You can't get the court to order it. The children are too old and they're ready to age out of the system. And then the parent has to struggle with, how do I deal with the grief at losing my child who may be living down the block, but I don't see. And that's a tough one. I get a lot of requests from parents about how do I manage? And in part, you have to manage the way you would any stress. You have to compartmentalize it, not spend every waking hour thinking about the loss, but try to live a meaningful life outside of that, especially because your kids, if they do reconcile, as you pointed out, years later, they may come back. You don't want them to feel the guilt of thinking that they ruined your life entirely because, they rejected you. It can also help to join with other parents who are suffering like this to help try to raise awareness of parental alienation in the culture. And the other thing is to educate your friends and relatives about the problem, because it's really tough for other people to understand, looking from the outside. How come what did you do wrong? Why does your child not want to spend time with you? You must have done something. And so it helps to educate them about that. This is a recognized problem, that kids can be brainwashed. We know that. We know adults can influence kids and teach them to hate people of a different race or a different religion. They can also teach them to hate, the other parent and that parent's family. And all the while, you still have to hold out some hope because the child is still alive. So it's what we call frozen. I call it frozen grief, because the grief is there, and you can't resolve it the way you would with the loss of a death of a loved one.
Sure.
Because you never know. It's more like the child's caught in an avalanche, and you don't know if they're going to be discovered. And in that time period, you just can't. It's just tough. So.
Now, the parent who's doing the alienating, is this more of it's an old idea, is this conscious or is this unconscious? Is this something they're doing, trying to separate their children from the other parent? Or is it possible that you could be alienating your child against your ex without even realizing you're doing it?
It's possible to be behaving in a way that could undermine the child's affection and respect for the other parent without realizing it. Maybe the child overhears you talking to friends and complaining about the other parent. So to some extent, but I think in most cases, the parents are very aware of what they're doing. They're aware of their alienating behaviors, and they're aware that it's wrong to do it. But they just feel like they want to indulge it, or they rationalize it to themselves as being best for the child, that because the former partner has no value to them, they feel like the kids don't need that person either. Or sometimes they want to substitute a new partner in the role of the parent. So like a stepfather, the mother might want the child to view the stepfather as the real father, so to speak. And so usually, yes, it's possible to not be fully aware of the damage you're causing, but usually I think parents are aware of what they're doing, and they're aware that it's wrong, and I think that's why they try to hide it, and rationalize the child's negative feelings, and rather than take responsibility for having taught the child that the other parent's a bad parent.
I assume you've worked as an expert in court, explaining to the judge what parental alienation is and what the signs are. Have you worked both ways, where you're trying to explain to the judge what happened in this case, that the children are alienated, or have you also worked on the other side to say these allegations are completely have you worked both sides of the case?
Yes, I've worked both sides of the case, and actually I've written sort of a very well cited article on false identifications, both of claiming that a child's alienated when the child's really not alienated. They may prefer to spend time with a parent, but they still love the other parent. Or they may behave negatively with both parents because they're reacting to the separation or divorce or have some other problem. And then there's also false allegations of alienating behavior, things a parent does that really aren't intended to alienate. A mother gives a child a cell phone and says, call me if you miss me. And the father turns that into, the mom's trying to program the child to stay on the phone the whole time with her, that kind of thing. So there are, just as with accusations of other forms of abuse, they can be true or false allegations. It's the same thing with parental alienation, that it can be used as a defense when it's clearly not there. And the courts need to be educated then about, how do you tell? What are the signs of a child who's either not really alienated or alienated for a good reason?
Right.
But I also think that there's some people say that all allegations of parental alienation are false, that it's not possible to influence a child to turn against a good parent, and that's, the science does not support that at all.
Right. And I again, thinking back to the very start of my career as a divorce attorney, when parental alienation was a new idea and there weren't the studies, there were just theoretical publications about it and people saying this could be happening. It was much harder to prove that in court, because you could say to the expert, well, what studies do you have, and what peer review articles are there, and what kinds of book chapters are there? Now there's this pile of psychological literature to support the testimony.
Exactly. There's scientific studies in some of the top tier journals published by the American Psychological Association. So it's very, very hard. Anyone who tries to deny this is really sticking their head in the sand when it comes to that. But it is important that you not take a simplistic view. You don't assume that if a child is rejecting a parent, it means that the child's been, alienated against that parent. And you really have to explore all the factors that could be contributing to that. But a big factor, if the alienation is not reasonable, in other words, if it's a good, loving parent who hasn't done anything to warrant that degree of rejection, in most cases, you're going to find a significant contribution from the other parent. Part of it may be out of their awareness, but for the most part, sometimes very, very deliberate programming, writing letters and having the kids sign it as though it came from the kid themselves. Just some very, very explicit way, punishing the child for saying anything nice about the other parent, or making the child feel bad if they report having had a good time when they spent time with the other parent. At this point, judges are aware that this is a real problem. Sometimes they don't like the phrase parental alienation because they feel it's been overused in court, and that it can lead to using that as an excuse for bad behavior. But clearly, judges understand the importance of parents supporting the child's relationship with the other parent. That's one of the best interest factors in many cases. And so you can, in court, you don't have to focus so much on what you label this problem as much as describing each parent's behavior. So we can see how likely is it that each parent has contributed to this problem. What's the child's behavior? Does it fit the profile of a child who's rejecting a parent without a good reason? They give trivial reasons. There's this campaign of hatred. It spreads to other relatives who haven't done anything at all, and maybe not even have interacted with the child since the time the child went from loving grandma to hating her. And Usually the children will deny any influence from the other parent. Sometimes they're just not aware of how they've been influenced, or
Yeah.
they feel like they've got to protect the parent. They realize the parent is kind of shouldn't have been denigrating the other parent, but they
Yeah.
deny that they've ever heard anything like that.
Yeah, and that not labeling is a big point that I try to make with my clients going to court. Lots of clients come these days. The big term is narcissist. He's a narcissist. She's a narcissist, and sometimes it's on the way to being true. It's just that courts don't like to hear lay people using psychological terms: parental alienation syndrome, narcissistic personality disorder. You've got to leave that to the experts and instead spend your time testifying to the behaviors you've actually seen, the messages you've actually received, the voicemails that were left, those sorts of things.
Exactly. You've got to sort of organize the evidence. First, if the child's alienated, you've got to demonstrate it, that the child's negative behavior is directed just at one parent, that it's extreme, that it's not warranted by that parent's behavior, so that and that it's long lasting. It's not just a temporary, momentary thing. And even if not, if you could be concerned about the other parent's behaviors, even if the child hasn't succumbed yet to rejecting you, you still it's the court should be concerned if a parent's mistreating a child emotionally by trying to get them to form this close bond, like a war, basically, and become an ally against the other parent. That's very destructive. So you want the courts to do that. But when it comes to the labels, it's like you say, they could be on their way to doing something. And we have a thing called concept creep, where, there's such a thing as having narcissistic traits without being a narcissistic personality disorder. Many successful inventors and owners of corporations have those kind of traits, and sometimes some of that is needed to be successful. So it's a mistake if your clients are the ones trying to apply these labels, for sure. And very often mental health professionals feel it's a mistake to use the labels too, because they feel like it's going to mislead the court. Instead, the idea is to describe what's going on and what needs to be done to protect the child from damage.
And to wrap up, I'm not even sure if these things exist. Have there been any longitudinal studies on children who are alienated against a parent? How does it affect their later relationships, their later social lives, their later emotional lives?
There have been some studies, not great ones, but there have been some. But now the sort of generation of alienated children have grown up, and they're posting videos on YouTube and all. Those who've come to realize what was done to them, and what we're learning is that they're very angry about it. They feel like the adults did not safeguard their interests as they were going to court. They feel like the judge didn't do it. There was a recent study by a lawyer in Canada who interviewed children who were placed in the custody of the parent they were rejecting. And at the time, the kids were very upset about it. And years later, they were interviewed by this lawyer and a social worker who worked with him. And they found that the kids were glad the court placed them with that parent, and they just wished the court would have done it sooner. That they had been able to develop a very good, rewarding relationship. And they realized that they weren't old enough to make a decision about rejecting a parent, and sometimes half of their family. So kids resent that they were given the responsibility, almost like if their preference was endorsed by the court's decision. They resent that so much responsibility was placed on the shoulders of a young child who didn't have the maturity to make a decision about severing a relationship with a parent.
Well, a lot of information, enormous amount of useful information you've shared with us. We're going to keep this up on the website for a good long time because people are looking for this type of information.
In terms of closing thoughts, I would say, we really need to have a cultural shift. We want parents who think they might be thinking about dispensing divorce poison. We want them to realize that they're going to be judged harshly by other people around them, that they're betraying their parental responsibility. Because there's too much damage to wait for the damage to occur and then try to treat it or reverse it. We've got to do things to try to prevent it from developing in the first place.
Absolutely. Very well said, Doctor.
Okay.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Hourglass podcast today.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me, David. I appreciate it.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
That was some great information from Dr. Richard Warshak. Really helpful. Share the link with your friends and family too. And don't log off just yet. We're going to be posting names and links to organizations and communities you will find helpful. Reach out and stay strong. Thanks for watching.